Hey guys, welcome to the 10th episode in the L24 Engine Rebuild series. I'm really excited about this one, not only because it's the 10th one, which is pretty cool, but it's because what we're going to be doing here is similar to some videos I've done a long time ago, which was rebuilding the carburetors, and that was mainly focusing on function and a little bit of cleaning. But the goal here is to obviously restore these because we're restoring every other part of the engine. So in this video, we're going to be tearing down the engine, or not the engine, technically, yes. Tearing down the carburetors and sending them off to get vapor honed. And I will show you the results of the vapor honing, which is really awesome. I'm super excited about that. And then, I wire wheeled all these components and got them ready for zinc plating. But starting from the beginning here, I took off these wing nuts that attach this sort of main component of the air filter housing on there. And then you just have the plate that attaches to the carburetors themselves, or actually the intakes. Inside, you'll find the actual air filter element, which is probably almost definitely something you're going to want to replace while you're doing this, especially if you're going to be restoring these, or just as part of regular maintenance. These outermost bolts can be removed with a 12mm socket, and due to the lip of that little inlet portion right there, I required an extension just to give it a little bit more clearance around that. And these inner larger nuts are actually kind of like spacers that those bolts with the wing nut end on them attach into. It takes a slightly larger wrench to get these out of here. I can't exactly remember the size, but these shouldn't take too long before they become loose enough where you can just take them out by hand. And as always, it's always worth the extra care to make sure you keep everything organized so that at reassembly time, you have a much easier time. First, you want to take this throttle linkage component off that links this part of the actual throttle pivot up there that connects to the cable to the throttle, I guess the linkage assembly below between the carburetors. Next, you can remove these 4 bolts that attach the balance tube to the intake manifolds. There are some gaskets here that I don't think you would ever have to scrape these off, but just know that they are there and should be replaced at reassembly. So there are a ton of things to remove here, and I have to caution you that if anything seems like it's giving you trouble, definitely take the time to treat it with some rust penetrant spray and just don't get ahead of yourself. Leave it overnight. This thing, this portion of the project went a lot better for me because that's kind of something I took into account and really just slowed down and didn't try to rush any of this stuff. But yeah, it would just be a pain to have something stuck in here. Everything that's, you're removing these components out of is aluminum. So, it shouldn't be too tough. And if you need to, you can definitely apply some heat to it with a torch, as you'll see me do on a few of these components here. But really just, if something's not moving, don't force it because you're going to break something. And you can see that I removed the PCV. And then here I'm trying to there are 3, I believe, fittings on here. There's 2 on the top, maybe 3, and then there's 1 on the side. And they should come out eventually. But like I said, you might want to treat them with something just to make sure they come out easily. Even then, some of these had to be wrestled out of there and had some leverage applied to them. But just understand you're taking a risk with some of that stuff. Maybe not so much with these fittings and these plugs, but, anything can get stuck and anything can strip threads, anything can, break off, bolt or whatever. But yeah, all this was after soaking this in rust penetrant spray and waiting a day or 2. So this screw here came out super easily. I thought this was going to have to use an impact driver. This plate, however, did require an impact driver. So I just kind of set it up there on the vise with some wood and a rag, just because everything on this balance tube is soft. But it really only took a tap or 2 with the impact driver before these screws could just be backed out by hand with a regular Phillips head screwdriver. With all that out of the way, you can just wiggle out this throttle linkage component here. You can see how the one piece just sort of fits into there between those 2, I guess, pivot points. and then it wraps around them in the middle. Obviously, it helps a little bit to have some form of lubricant here and slide it off there, especially because these things have not moved for many, many years. But yeah, it just takes a little bit of wiggling and it comes off. So I still had this fitting to remove here. I think there are actually 2 of these on there, but it's the same procedure, obviously, to remove them. And there was one other plug on the side there that had to be removed. Finally, I removed the freeze plugs. This actually has some 20mm freeze plugs on the side of it, the same that you'll see on the intake manifold. And the procedure is just the same as removing any kind of freeze plug. You're just trying to tap the side until it turns in place. I had a little bit of a hard time with this, but eventually it did turn. You can try to apply some heat to the aluminum balance tube if that helps. I ended up doing that. It didn't help a lot. It was just kept hammering it and eventually it turned. But once they turn in place, you can just take a set of pliers of some kind and pull them out like that. Also note that I do carry these on my website for sale, so don't worry about removing them. You can just put brand new fresh ones in. So with that, you have a balance tube that is pretty much completely stripped here, and in my case is getting ready to be sent off for vapor honing. All right, so now we're going to get back to the rest of the carburetor assembly and remove the nuts that attach to the intake manifold studs so you can pull the carburetors off. You can pull them off one by one, and eventually you get an opportunity to just pull out that linkage central piece there. And yeah, they just come off usually pretty fine, and the spacers in there are sometimes a little bit less easy to deal with. Sometimes they're stuck on there pretty good, and you have to pry them off. But at this point, we're going to set the carburetors aside and do some more work to get these intake manifolds completely stripped down. So there are these 2 bolt holes on each of the carburetors where this you can see this bolt that I'm removing. I'm not sure exactly what these are, but I just got them removed at this time. So if somebody knows in the comments, just let me know, but I haven't quite looked at the diagram yet to see what these connect to. So this tube connecting these is a water kind of bypass connector here. So on the outside here, this is a water outlet connector that you can remove. So it has these nuts that secure the central tube into place there and kind of tighten it, I guess. You don't have a lot of room here, and you can't put a socket on there. And it doesn't give you a lot of room to put a wrench on there. So just be really careful that you're not going to round either of these nuts. One of them came off pretty easily for me, but the other one was a little bit harder. So I used my butane torch to heat up the intake manifold itself. It's cast aluminum. Remember that anything you're going to be heating up so you can remove something easily, you want to heat up the thing that you're going to be removing it from, not the piece that you're trying to remove itself, because that's the part that's going to expand and hopefully make it a lot easier for you to remove, in this case, this nut out of here. And then the last thing you should have to remove from these intake manifolds are these freeze plugs, and it's the same procedure as before. Just hit the edge till they rotate, and then you can take some kind of needle nose pliers like this and pull them straight out. So with the intakes kind of torn down completely, we're going to move on to the carburetors themselves. And you're going to start by removing these screws that attach the dash pot cap to the rest of the carburetor. Obviously use an impact driver to remove these screws, otherwise you definitely risk stripping the screw head there. But after that you can just take out a regular Phillips head screwdriver and remove them by hand. The dash pot moves off pretty easily. Just make sure you don't force it off, and just that it goes up right on that central the piston here, and then you can take the spring out as well, and then the piston. Same deal here. Just be gentle with this stuff. This will come up easily. Don't force anything. You can see the main reason that was probably hard is that my needle seems to be dipped in tar inside of this carburetor, but not to worry, we're going to be cleaning all of this very soon. So moving on to the float bowl here, I decided to remove that inlet fitting there just because it was on. It was going to be a little bit easier to get a good hold of it. And you can move that by hand after you have it loosened with a wrench. And then I moved on over, obviously, to the bolts there, or I'm sorry, the 4 screws that connect that. And similar procedure as before, we're just using our impact driver and then the screwdriver once it's broken loose. If this carburetor has been sitting for a while, it's probably going to be pretty gummy in there, and it might be pretty difficult to remove this. Just kind of work it off with maybe like a plastic chisel or something like that, and just keep working it off. And then you can just pull it straight off. So at this point, I did a little bit of jumping around, and it's not going to make a whole lot of sense, but a lot of these things doesn't necessarily matter which order you do them in. But I just loosened off this bolt here that holds on the piece that interfaces with the linkage, the central linkage. And that's actually multiple component. It's that larger nut there that I dropped. And then there's a washer behind that, and then there's that arm, and I believe another washer behind that, maybe a lock washer of some kind. And because it's that irregular shape, you kind of have to pull it off, maybe even use some WD-40 of some kind. Next, I use the impact driver to remove this arm that connects to the mixture kind of assembly down there. Probably overkill, but I just wanted to make sure that it didn't strip that screw head. It was already pretty, looked like it had already potentially been stripped a little bit by a previous owner. Next, I removed this nut that attaches to this, I guess you can call it out of maybe this axle of some kind that connects the float bolt to the rest of the carburetor assembly. And then you can just pull the carburetor directly off, or vice versa. Pull the float bolt off of the carburetor body. It should just come straight off with all of those, with that nut and then the washer removed. Then you can remove this. This is what I called an axle, but in all reality, nothing moves around it, so it's probably not that. This shaft that connects the float bolt to the carburetor body. There's also a little rubber piece inside of here that you can just pick out. And make sure you clean that before that goes back in. And then I removed this gas clamp that goes on the float bolt outlet that goes out to the mixture screw. It's just the same clamp that we've been working with so far. And once you loosen that, you can pull the float bolt off. And then eventually, if there's a piece of gas line in there like there was for mine, you can just pick that out as well. And then the last thing to remove on the float bowl is this drain plug, which requires a 12mm socket. And finally, I'm going to remove this bolt here that holds together all of the linkage that still remains, or actually the throttle kind of assembly on this carburetor body. A lot of stuff will come off here. Just try to keep it together as much as you can. There's a spring inside. I would try to keep that at least in the same bag, you know, how you're storing these parts. So like I said, I jumped around a lot here, but that's kind of the fun of disassembly, is you can just take apart whatever you feel like at the moment, which apparently for me at this time was this thing that holds that nut in place for the inlet to the float bowl. Next, I removed this float bowl inlet assembly itself. There's actually quite a few different components involved in it. As you can see, it looks like a nut on the outside, but it's more of like a hollow bolt with a hole through it, and it even has a little filter thing inside of it. And it also has that the piece that connects to the two screws on the float bowl. So just, again, keep all that together in your bag of storage equipment, and we'll go over what gets zinc plated and whatnot later on. So this little rod that holds the float on, for me, was extremely frozen. So it required a lot of rust penetrant spray and weighting. But eventually I was able to just kind of hammer it down, and then found a really tiny screwdriver that I could just push it the rest of the way through. And when it drops out below, then you can just pull the float itself out there. And next you can remove this needle and seat assembly. Note that these are sold in the carburetor kits, brand new ones that I sell, so you don't necessarily need to save those. So next I went to remove the butterfly valve, and on this style of carburetor, this Japanese made style of carburetor, this is always really difficult because you can't use the impact driver, because that shaft there, you're going to bend it, and that's obviously a really fragile point. That valve has to be able to be really flush when it's closed. and you just don't want to be hammering on that. So what you need to do is get a screwdriver that fits it perfectly and really have a lot of downward force, more so than you do rotational, and you can't let it slip at all because you're going to strip the screw head. And it's always really hard. In fact, I actually think that these are what's called a JIS screw, Japanese industrial standard, I believe. So it's a little bit different than a standard Phillips head, so we would never be able to get a perfect fitting screwdriver on it. And usually I always end up stripping these screws. And actually what I did, and I'll show you this in a future video, I ended up mangling these pretty bad and then replacing them with it's a little bit better option for these, the same size and everything, thread pitch and whatnot. But with the valve removed, or with the screws removed, you can pull out the valve itself. And then with the valve removed, you can just pull the shaft out directly. So kind of a holdover from earlier, I didn't take this, this stop screw out, so I just pulled that out. Next, I removed the mixture screw. And I think you can just remove one of these first. I'm not sure which one, and then it's just out of your way to remove the other one. But what I did is I just kind of backed them off in tandem. To where I could just take out the stop screw first, or the butt of that, and then I could take the mixture screw itself completely off. I also took off this little clip that holds, I'm not sure exactly what this thing is called right now, but you actually have to take off the spring, and then you can push the rope rod, not where you just took it off. You have to push it the opposite direction and pull it out of the back. So that's actually pretty much everything. I mean, apart from just the this cap on top of the dash pot, pretty much everything is disassembled here and ready to be sent off for vapor honing, zinc plating, and whatnot. So I sent my parts off to get vapor honed by a company called Vapor Honing Technologies in North Carolina. And they actually make these machines, so they really know what they're talking about when you ask for their opinion on what type of finish you should use. I used a fine glass bead slurry here to achieve this kind of polished finish, and I'm really excited with it. In fact, I would love to buy a machine if I can have it make sense financially. But if you're interested in it, I would definitely encourage you guys to look into them because it's a fantastic company with a great product. So even though I don't have anything back from zinc plating yet, I decided to wire wheel everything and assemble it, mostly just because I want to look at it until it's ready to be disassembled and then have everything prepared for zinc plated finally, which, because it's wire wheel, most of these things are pretty much all the way there. I want to go over with some of them a little bit better before they get that final finish. But yeah, I mean, it just gives me a good sense of what everything looks like, and I'm really happy. I mean, the vapor honing just really makes everything stand out so much better. But yeah, that's going to do it for this video, and I am excited to see you guys in the next one. I just heard back from the machine shop, and they're really moving on my engine, so it sounds like things are going to start progressing a little bit quicker. But thank you for watching, and take care.